long for our pilot countries to start becoming model countries, and the UK is certainly no exception, which brings us to today and the reason why we are all here to celebrate. I'm pleased to introduce the guest of honor, Emma Harewood, Director of the Lighthouse. Emma, let's start with tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Great. So first of all, just thank you all for coming. It's just so lovely to see lots of faces that I haven't seen for a really long time. So yeah, thank you all. It's brilliant. I'm going to keep swiping through so I can see everybody looking. I guess maybe some of you might not know, but a little bit of background about me and what I did before this piece of work. So my background is from health. I've always been a health practitioner and started my career as a dietitian, a children's dietitian. And worked in children's services for several years. Then moved into much more of a kind of whole system design roles across health and social care, the voluntary sector, and then more recently, obviously in this project, police and criminal justice. And I suppose what was really interesting for me is that as you go on through your career, I suddenly realised I'd come far, far away from what it was that I first wanted to set out and do, and that was to help children and young people. And so I determined that my next job would be something that made a difference to children and young people. And found myself at the beginning of this journey, undertaking the review that led me to meet Bragi and Chris and other colleagues internationally who had set up really fantastic services.
I think we should also start with a few words about what the Lighthouse actually is.
Yeah, great. So I guess like the Barnahus model, it's a multi-agency service in London for children that have experienced child sexual abuse. So predominantly 0 to 18, but also up to young people up to 25 with a learning disability. And a bit like that Barnahus model, it's a child-centred approach. We wanted to create one safe space for children and young people to come where they could meet all the different professionals that they might need to meet on their journey after first telling what had happened to them. And so in the Lighthouse, you find police, you find safeguarding child protection colleagues, you find health, sexual health, therapeutic and advocacy services. And our mission really is to support those children and their parents and their siblings throughout the whole journey from the first time of telling through to the justice process at the end. And obviously, as you can imagine, it's been modelled very much along the lines of what we've learned from Barnahus, but also from child advocacy centres in America and in other parts of the world, in Canada and Australia. And really takes all of that learning and puts it into the context of England and our kind of statutory rules, legal system, and all of that.
As you indicate in your response there, it is quite a journey to get to where you are today. And indeed, your book, which I have a nice copy of here, is about that journey. Can you tell us maybe why you wanted to write a book about that journey?
I guess in the first instance to inspire other people, and that may be to inspire them because they work in a children's service and they want to make a difference or an improvement to a children's service. It might be that they work in another area where they want to make a step change. It might even be in their village or their town that they want to start up a voluntary service or some new charity. But the idea really was to help get other people inspired that actually what you think at the outset feels impossible can be possible. That actually, even if it feels like you're never going to get there, actually you can and you do. So to really kind of inspire people to go for it. And I guess partly to celebrate and remember. It was actually a really incredible time just gathering everything together to prepare to write the book and going back and reliving all of those different things. And some colleagues of mine that helped me as I was preparing the book said, just remember to tell us how you felt at the time. And so it was quite a roller coaster, even writing it, going back and remembering, how did I feel when that happened? Or how did I feel when that happened? And so I've got this image of me as a nice granny sitting in my comfy chair, looking at the book on my bookshelf, thinking, yeah, I did something worthwhile with my life. So yeah, and then I guess towards the end of the book, it's very much about sharing what we've learned in the Lighthouse, and what Rob and Deborah and I've learned as we've set up the service, and what Marion and her team have learned, and how we've really learned along the way. We thought we perhaps knew what we wanted at the outset, but actually we've learned absolutely lots on this 2-year journey so far. And so as you get to the end of the book, it starts to tell you a little bit about what we've learned, some of the pitfalls, what we've changed along the way. So it ends up being quite a practical guide as well for people that actually may want to set up a service like this themselves.
Interesting to know about the advice that you got about sharing how you felt. And actually, as I was reading this book, I got the feeling that quite many people on this call could probably see themselves in this journey with you, even if they're working on something else, because there are so many places where it just is reflective of an experience, which comes with the task of creating change or doing something good in the world. And I think in terms of being a handbook of sorts and inspiring, for everyone, I read this entire book today. And at the end of the book, I felt inspired. If I had unlimited funds, I would buy it and send it to everyone on our mailing list and everyone here today, because I think everyone can get something out of this, especially, you were saying about taking small step changes. You describe a lot of small step changes in here, actually, about how these other steps towards Barnahus were important milestones in gathering trust and getting the right people together to meet each other, to find that team that you need to move forward with. So yeah, I think you've achieved what you have set out to do with this book.
And there are so many people on this call today that, although I've written the book, actually none of this would have been possible without loads of the people on this call today. It really was an absolute collaborative effort. It couldn't have happened without everybody. So it's really lovely just to be able to share it with everyone.
Absolutely. The other thought I have here is, at some point when you and I had first met, I thought, why haven't I met her sooner? And when I read the book, I realized, why? You've been busy.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the beginning of the journey for you. Mm-hmm. What exactly convinced you that you should go on this journey?
Well, it's been a really unusual and unique position, I think, in the journey, because it's not very often that you get to be the person that is commissioned to do a piece of research that then comes up with a series of recommendations that you're then allowed to stay on and implement those recommendations, to then design the model, co-design it with children and with professionals, and then be able to then kind of switch hats and then work with a number of great organizations to implement that, and then get to actually run it once it's up and running. And it's quite unusual, I think, to go from, researcher to commissioner to designer to implementer to manager. And so, yeah, I think it's been quite a unique journey in that sense and quite unusual. But going right back to the beginning, the part that absolutely stirred my heart, I suppose, was some of the facts and some of the figures. And don't shout at me, factual people, if I get these wrong, but they're the numbers that are kind of seared on my heart that I remember, which is those numbers that tell us that probably 1 in 10 children experience child sexual abuse. So I think of my children's class at school, that's 3 children in the class for all of my children across the whole school year. That's a lot of children. That's more children than have asthma and diabetes. That's a lot of children. And yet only 1 in 8 feel brave enough to tell, or feel able, or have an opportunity or are heard when they try and tell. But the number that I found even more shocking was that when they do tell, that in London at that time, only 1 in 4 were then able to access health and therapeutic and support services. And that was really the knife, you know, to the heart. And then more recently, I've learned that only 6% of the children that tell make it to a criminal court all the way through the justice process to the end, and that only 3% get a guilty verdict at the end. And so, you know, those numbers, they speak for themselves, you know, they're, yeah, heartbreaking. And I suppose the other thing that kind of kept me going was I felt a little bit like I'd kind of finally found the calling or the purpose in my life. And my faith's really important to me. And so I sort of felt like I'd been commissioned on this journey and that kind of God was behind it. And, you know, there were so many kind of miraculous things along the way that I thought, is this really happening? Is this really just me making this happen? So, you know, you think about the massive amount of funding that we managed to secure at a time of real austerity, that the police, you know, kindly agreed to allow us to train psychologists to lead their interviews. You know, there were just so many things along the way that I just thought, this is just amazing. You know, it felt like I was on a journey, part of something even bigger than me, really.
Would you like to share a piece of that journey now? I think you've prepared to read something for us tonight.
I'll just read a few kind of excerpts of us along the way. So just starting at the beginning. Imagine yourself walking into a place of hope, filled with light, a place where you feel at home, even though you've never been there before. A safe space where you're going to be listened to and where you can go at your pace, greeted with snacks and a smile, and you feel valued and held. The swing chair feels secure, wrapping around you like a cocoon. The sand table is mesmerizing, the ball bearings slowly tracing out a pattern in the sand. But what if you felt that you were living a lie? Your days filled with guilt and shame and fear. You'd been fearful to talk about what was happening to you. And today you're fearful of the consequences now that you've spoken out and told someone. It feels like it's all going too fast. There are so many professionals that want to talk to you. Why did you ever speak out? The Lighthouse came from a stirring in my heart to respond to the shocking statistics of child sexual abuse in our nation. It was a personal call to action and a decision not to stop until I'd influenced a change. So I'm just going to take you to Iceland, which, gosh, it was almost, 6 years ago. A visit to the Barnahus in Reykjavik stirred my already deep conviction that we must see a change in London. Getting off the plane into a snow-covered Reykjavik with Dr. Goddard and Dr. Brennan, we were greeted at the airport by a sign that encouraged us: suspect child abuse, report it. And then we drove to a hotel with a taxi driver who knew all about the Barnahus. He'd heard a campaign on the radio for funding more psychologists, and he knew good things, he said. The public in England at the time still believed that infamous men and football coaches or gangs were abusers, not your neighbour, not a family member. And although public opinion has changed greatly in that time, it still feels like a taboo subject. So skip 3 or 4 years ahead, and we're now in the Lighthouse in London. The Lighthouse is a child-friendly, safe space for children and young people. It's a place of hope and new beginnings, a place where children and young people feel listened to and held. There's something unique about all the agencies being under one roof. Professionals from health, social care, therapeutic services, police, all based together and can easily talk to each other. Children don't need to tell their story multiple times, and we can minimize delays in referrals by just popping next door. This is really helpful if you think of a child or a young person that isn't sure that they want to access a service. Like a 15-year-old, let's call her Tia, who didn't want a health check when she first came to the Lighthouse, but later was able to ask the advocate to introduce her to our nurse specialist to talk about sexual health. Or another person, let's call him Max. He didn't want to involve the police after he was groomed into sending explicit images of himself to others. He bonded really well with his advocate, who was able to introduce him to the police liaison officer. The officer was just like any other Lighthouse practitioner, not in uniform, and was able to explain what would happen in the investigative process, what the interview would be like, what might happen if it went to court. Max felt reassured and decided that he did want to report after all, and the investigative process started. Allowing a child or young person to feel in control after sexual abuse is essential. This has often been taken away from them during the abuse. And the Lighthouse ensures that children and young people feel able to go at their pace and on their terms. So one of the other things that we talked about earlier was about this, the piloting of psychology-led interviews. So let me just tell you a little bit about that. The vision for compelling investigative interviews is to enable two main benefits: a less traumatizing experience for children, but also an interview that enables the CPS to make a charging decision. For a child or young person, hearing the news that their investigation will not be progressing due to lack of evidence can be heard by the child as "they didn't believe me." And that can be exactly what the alleged abuser will have told them over years of abuse. No one will believe you. For a young boy, let's call him Jason, the skills of the psychologist were really put to the test. Jason was finding talking about the abuse really difficult and embarrassing. He was doing everything he could to avoid talking to the psychologist, rolling on the floor, fiddling with his clothes, hiding behind the sofa. The psychologist used two tools to draw him back to the conversation. Firstly, a physical game of mirroring her clapping a rhythm, which helped him focus his mind and his body back on her. He slowed his movements and he found his way back to the sofa. Secondly, she reminded him about the stop-go stones they'd used in an earlier session, and with his permission, she touched the green go stone to signify it was time to talk, and reminded him that at any time he could touch the red stone and stop and take a break. It worked really well, and Jason felt in control, and in their next break, they dashed out and switched to a minute of football in the corridor. So just from the closing chapter, my hopes and dreams for the future are to see more child houses across the UK so that every child can access the support they need. Each will need to have a local feel, as it will be shaped by the local practitioners and children. Each will build on the great practice and existing services that are already in place for adults across the UK. They should all be child-centred and push the boundaries for child-friendly justice. The Home Office Child House guidelines are expected soon, and so all that is to remain is to identify funding to develop the child houses, whether that's from central government, commissioners, or the charitable sector. It would be wrong, though, to end this without acknowledging that prevention is better than needing a recovery service like a Lighthouse. How as a society can we spot the early signs and be curious and brave enough to intervene and ask the questions? How can we equip our children at the right age for them with the knowledge that they need about their bodies, consent, and relationships? How do we as adults have our eyes open to spot the signs and to ask the right questions?
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I have to say, it must have been difficult deciding because there's so many important, valuable snippets in your book. For anyone who is interested to know how to get a copy, Anastasia has put a link in the chat. And at this time, I would like to invite everyone to raise their glass in a toast. To you, Emma, congratulations on authoring your very first book, and for that book being what we will certainly find as a Barnahus CAC, Child House, Lighthouse community to be an important resource to the many budding Barnahus and similar services throughout the world. Cheers to you.
Thank you.
Full disclosure, mine is apple juice. I would like now to introduce Chris Newlin, Executive Director of the National Children's Advocacy Center, which was the first CAC in the United States. Participants, you may know that the European Barnahus model is inspired by the CAC model, which is widespread in the United States, 900 plus locations. Now, Chris, we've heard so far from Emma that she wanted to write this book to inspire others to go on similar journeys. And you yourself have been involved in sharing the American experience and inspiring others worldwide for decades now. And I've heard you were an important contact in the early days of developing the Lighthouse. Do you have any special reflections about the early stages of that journey?
Thanks very much, Shauna. I appreciate the opportunity. And, quite honestly, I feel like I played a very, very small role in all of this. I remember Emma reaching out to me, and it was almost shocking to me in a way, because as I was thinking about speaking today and sharing some of my perspectives, I thought back to a time when there was a European IPSCAN meeting in Tampere, Finland. This was 2011, and we presented about the CAC and the Barnahus model. And I remember going to dinner with one of the plenary speakers who was from the UK, who shared that although this does seem to kind of make sense, it will never happen in the UK. It just will never come to be in the UK. And I just think back about being at the restaurant and hearing that and saying, I think maybe there's going to be some people who will see this vision and want to grasp it. And so then for a few years later, for Emma to reach out to me and for us to have some initial conversations, it was exciting. And I think I actually even shared that with her during that time. And to see how far, how fast, how progressive things have moved is really not a testament to anything that I did. It's really a testament to what's been done throughout Europe with the Barnahus movement. And I have to give a lot of credit of that to my friend Bragi, who was the great emissary. All this, despite whatever differences we have in cultures and settings and whatnot, I think back to when the National Children's Advocacy Center was first started, and it was started with two basic premises. Number one, the only way we can be successful is by having a team that works together with diverse professionals. And number two, whatever that team does, it should actually help kids and not cause them more harm. Everything we do is based on those two concepts at our center. And I actually think this entire model, continues to rest on those two. And we can apply those, as Emma so eloquently said, in different settings, in different cultures, in different contexts. It has to have the local feel. It has to be, cognizant of whatever national standards that are in place. But those pinnings that guide us in our philosophical belief that we can change the system. We can change systems to work better and on greater behalf of our children, and they should be trauma-informed and hope-centered. So Emma, the invitation to speak today is humbling and flattering. It is, a great recognition for you to actually put from, on paper that experience. I'm so glad you included the feelings part, because people think about this and they think this is a simple proposition. Well, you'll just do this, but they don't understand how heavy of a lift it is and how it requires people with great fortitude and character to persevere when they're pushing up against institutions that are unwilling or unlikely or unyielding to change. But now I look at it, I think about the last IPSCAN meeting. in Prague, and there was the the Barnahus Lighthouse model being presented. There where they were talking about this work. So anyway, what an honor to be here. And Emma, congratulations on this outstanding work. Super proud of all that you and your colleagues have accomplished. And on behalf of all of the CACs in America, you are one of us, and we are one of you. So thank you very much. And I apologize if I have to peel away, but today is holiday in the U.S. and I have to go check on my turkey since it is traditional to cook it. But Emma, my sincere appreciation for all of your work and leadership, and for all of your colleagues throughout Europe who are changing the world through your children. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being with us, Chris. And I'm glad you mentioned IPSCAN, because it gave me a reason to show this brilliant photo of in the Hague in 2016, 2017, one of those years.
Yep.
Where it's, Emma, maybe you can say who's in the photo here.
So obviously Bragi on the left, Dr. Deborah Holtz, we're going to be speaking to a bit later, myself, Sybil, one of Deborah's trainee doctors, Anna, our senior advocate, and obviously Chris on the end.
Brilliant. Moving right along in our agenda, I would like to now introduce Dr. Deborah Holtz. You're on the call. Yes, I think I saw your name in the list. Yes, there you are. Hi, Deborah. Just making sure. Deborah is the pediatric lead for the Lighthouse and has been a consultant community pediatrician since 1990. Deborah, we heard earlier from Emma about why she was convinced to embark on her journey to the Lighthouse. And I've heard that you were a local champion in the early days of this journey. And I read in the book about how you were part of a steering committee and then became part of the senior group of people in the Lighthouse. Can you tell us, what did it take for Emma to convince you to get on board? And do you have any special reflections from that time?
Well, thank you very much for asking me. And you're absolutely right about the journey, so I won't repeat that. And I was working with colleagues, you saw in the photograph, Sybil, Anna, and actually Rob Senior, who's here. The four of us were working in what was called the CSA Hub, which was a precursor to the Lighthouse. So it was a kind of really pared down just 4 professionals, whereas the Lighthouse, we now have 35 people working there, which is absolutely fantastic. So my work over many, many years has convinced me that children who have been sexually abused and exploited and young people need an all-encompassing service for them with all aspects of their care. So I'm absolutely delighted that we have the Lighthouse.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Deborah, you're actually quoted quite a few times in the book. So anyone who wants to grab onto her wisdom, there's quite a lot of it in here.
I think you know, like Emma, and it's really important that you know, all of us are absolutely passionate about the advocacy for the child and making sure, as Emma's described in her book, there is a place which is for them that can be done, bearing their needs, their emotional needs, their developmental needs in mind in order to get justice. And I think that's what is absolutely described, and that's what the Lighthouse is all about.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Deborah, for your words to this call tonight. And Emma, about the journey itself, you talk in the book about all of the roles that you took on: researcher, model designer, commissioner, implementer, manager, change leader, and even at one point, unemployed. How did you manage to keep going during these key turning points? And And what lessons can you share with us about maybe that key turning point in and of itself?
Yeah, I think what I remember mostly of the whole journey is just talking to lots and lots of people. Usually in person. I much prefer meeting in person, so lockdown is driving me berserk. But London is split into 33 boroughs, and so there were 33 of everything. So there were 33 doctors to find and 33 CAMHS teams to find, and there were 33 social care departments to talk to, and luckily there weren't quite that many police teams. I think there was about 12 at the time. But it felt like going and talking to lots and lots of people, and I was very good at what someone once told me to learn, which was called my elevator pitch. So I could share my compelling message in, I think it's supposed to be in 30 seconds or something, the time it takes you to get from the first to the fourth floor in a lift. But obviously changing it depending on who I was talking to. And then, as well as going to 33 boroughs, which was interesting in itself, actually, traveling all around London, I talked to people at many different levels. So I spoke to frontline practitioners, managers of services, commissioners and funders of services, and across statutory and the third sector. So I think at one point, Holly and I had a list of about 1,000 people that were our key stakeholders. And that's a lot of people to keep going and to keep on board. And so I think really that was a big part of it. Communicate. And then obviously another massive part was listening to children and young people and adult survivors, and getting the message from them, and help, and then being really part of that co-design part of that journey all the way along. So it felt like it was a lot of talking to a lot of people. But I think that's essential in something like this, because I found myself often needing to influence without any authority. And so when you're trying to bring together lots and lots of government agencies, statutory, non-statutory, there's no one person in charge. I used to laugh and say, if you go to the top, where do you get to? You get to the Prime Minister, really. There was really no one else that was in charge of all the composite parts that made it up. And so that's why I needed this kind of array of champions to be the army to all convince in all the different places they were. So in a way, it was a bit like being a salesperson, I suppose, in a funny sort of way. But I guess that was against a backdrop of massive change. It felt like a big shift in the country in terms of awareness of child sexual abuse, against the backdrop of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, which is going to be drawing to a close in the next year or two. So it felt like there was a bit of a momentum and a groundswell nationally anyway. And I guess finally, it's such a compelling issue. I mean, who can bear to think of a child being abused? It's not too much of a hard sell. So yeah, just a lot of talking.
Yeah, actually, I have a quote from your book that really stood out to me about what you just described, about saying this phase always feels frustratingly slow and you can never move beyond it without an implementation structure and some money, but the networking is essential to prepare everyone for change. So right on. And to actually a little bit of what Chris mentioned about the fortitude that it takes to keep going. You basically have an entire chapter of that in your book, chapter 8, about letting go. It maybe is my favorite chapter in the whole book because it is so personal about something, I guess to you, it felt like a failure in that moment, but it turned out to be so much, it was a blessing in disguise, I guess is the way to put it. It was how everything was supposed to be.
Yeah, because if I hadn't walked away at that point and left the project for other people to finish off the commissioning and the, putting the service out to tender, then I wouldn't have been able to then come alongside the providers and work with the providers to bid to run the service. you know, I needed that clean break. But yes, it was a bit scary being unemployed. And
always is, I think. Brilliant. We're now going to move on to our next guest speaker, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Rob Senior, consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist. Rob, you have a key role in the operations of the Lighthouse. We've heard a bit about the early days and the journey to get the Lighthouse up and running. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how it's going. What has been some key impacts for children and professionals, and have there been any surprises so far for you?
I think it's going well. First of all, just to say, as other people have, enormous congratulations to Emma for having done this. I don't know how she's done this in time. I've even read the book and been a bit inspired by its content, even though I've been with Emma on a lot of this journey, and I've read the book already in draft form. So it's just an amazing piece of work. I think we're doing extraordinarily well in the circumstances. None of us have named COVID-19, the pandemic, and the impact that's had on all of us, but particularly, I think, on young people. And some of the young people we see, we're yet to see the surge that I think we're anticipating we will see of abused children. We're seeing more children in difficulty, and that I think it speaks to the complexity of some of the predicaments and the long-standing adversity that a lot of the children we see have experienced. But I know that's not the question you're asking, but I think specifically, but I think we're remarkably maintaining our kind of throughput, working remotely, doing all kinds of innovative and important, including kind of thinking about groups, educational groups for parents, and called educational, I think, for good reasons, because the Crown Prosecution Service don't want us to be encouraging parents to talk to each other about their young people's kind of experience of abuse for those kind of reasons, but for criminal justice reasons. But it is a support group for parents, and I just make that link to what we've learned about the number of parents who we see where they talk perhaps for the first time about their own abuse. So the intergenerational story is part of the complexity we're grappling with. And you're asking me what we've learned. That's one of the things we've learned, that actually many of the young people we're seeing, that sexual abuse is the bit of the iceberg that's come above the water. Below the iceberg is long-standing adversity and mistreatment, and it's quite shocking, really. But as part of that are very troubled carers and parents. So, you know, we're learning that this is a whole system story in attending to the young people. Everybody knows that whether you're believed is really critical to your recovery. Well, it's not just that. It's, I think, how well we can help parents to be able to respond to and think about and listen to and support their own children through the process of recovery. So we've learned a lot. The impact on us as practitioners, I know that all of you, it's lovely to have people here from around the world who've already shared experiences with us in various settings, but we knew about vicarious trauma. We knew about the difficulty of this work, the extent to which we had to try and support our staff. I think we've underestimated how much we would need to do that, given the pressure of referrals that we're under and the stress and strain on all of us and on colleagues. So that's been a really serious challenge, trying to sustain that. And then another big part of that is that when you do something as complex as this, and you know, I don't think there are many people other than Emma that I've ever met who could do this. When we were bidding for this, I said to Emma, if you don't lead this service, I'm not going to do it. You know, I'll do it if you do it, but I'm not going to do it if you don't. And the complexity of bringing all these agencies together in this country. It's a shame Chris has gone, or maybe he hasn't. His pictures, his image.
He's off to check his turkey.
But he's gone to sort out his turkey, bless him. But you know, in a sense, bringing all those agencies together in one place, especially in this country where they're statutory agencies and voluntary sector, third sector agencies. But if you think about it, if you've got physical health, mental health, advocacy, police, social care, and I've probably missed things out. And even some of those providers are different, NSPCC, Solace, just to bring them all together in one place with different cultures, with different ways of working. I mean, just extraordinarily difficult. And I think so. Emma's been in the position, I think, of, well, all of us have, but particularly Emma, of trying to juggle that and try and kind of attend to the needs of all those different elements in the Lighthouse. And I know there are people on this call who are involved in the evaluation, and I hope they kind of capture just what a task that's been. And to do that at pace, which we have really, we've got there really pretty quickly. So I think it's been a pretty amazing piece of work. And yeah, Emma needs to take a huge amount of credit for that. But it's a team, and I know there are other members of the clinical team on this call as well. So I think it's a real team effort.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
Rob. Thank you so much. You know, in the book, the complicated structure is described, I think, as 4 founding organizations and 20 stakeholder organizations in terms of like the scale and the scope of what you're describing there. And then it was very much a hurry up and wait. So, you know, you're waiting for such a long time, and then all of a sudden you've got 6 months to get this thing off the ground with 4 founding organizations and 20 stakeholder organizations. And then you're putting the cart before the horse on so many of these very complicated details that no one's sure who has it's not always clear anyway, who has the reins on certain topics that they don't normally have the reins on because it hasn't been assigned to them. And yeah, so if you want to read more about that and the teamwork aspect, I read with great interest as well. So thank you so much for highlighting those points, Rob. They're definitely well covered in this book. Moving on to our last special speaker, I would like to introduce Bragi Goodbronzon. He is a member of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. He is formerly the director of the Icelandic Child Protection Agency, and in these circles, he is known as many things: the founder of the Icelandic Barnahus, the one who started it all, the godfather of the European approach to Barnahus, honorary founding member of the Promise Barnahus Network, not to mention our colleague and our friend. Tell us, Bragi, what lies ahead for the Lighthouse and other similar services that are in their early years?
Oh, Shauna, what an introduction. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Okay, you can see. Okay, first, I would like to express my gratitude to Emma for hosting this online meeting and congratulate her with the publication. It's wonderful to be here with you and to see you and some familiar faces. In particular, I love to see Chris all the time because he has been such an impact on the development of Barnahus in Europe, always ready to share his rich knowledge on child-friendly and disciplinary approach and so on. So it's wonderful to listen in. And I could see Anna from Scotland and Shauna, of course, and I know there are lots of people there I'm going to meet one of these days. But this book, if I focus on my impressions of it, I was honored to be invited to write forward, and I want to read few sentences from these forward. And it sounds like this. This book is about a journey where the point of departure is a novel idea. Every step on the road traveled is fueled by vision and dedication, and every roadblock is met by ingenuity and persistence. The Lighthouse is a wonderful example of an implementation, a living process that will continue to evolve as this journey never ends. This book is certainly an invaluable documentary of the creation of the Lighthouse, the first Barnahus in the UK. Moreover, it also demonstrates individual achievement, a testimony on how one person can make a difference by resilience, professional commitment, and perhaps most importantly, passion and love for vulnerable children at the heart of her actions. And I mean every word of this. What makes this book so readable is that Emma shares with the reader her emotions, and the source of her emotions is so explicitly made when she refers to her brother and the struggle he is dealing with his mental problems, and you can sort of you can sense where the fuel in Emma's great work comes from, and this I feel is so wonderful, because this is the sort of motor, the primus motor in the whole process, the complete dedication. So it brings us an intuition in this process, not only by documentation, but the insights of this journey. I will never forget when Emma came with her colleagues Lauren Brennan and Andrea Goddard in early 2015 to Iceland. And I was extremely happy that England, of all places, showed interest in what was happening in Iceland. And perhaps because I studied in England, in Canterbury, almost half a century ago. And I felt indebted to England. I wanted to do everything I possibly could to assist and contribute and so on. And this was such a wonderful visit. They were so knowledgeable about all the issues involved in the process. So it was a great pleasure. And following this, my invitation to the House of Lords to address the conference that was held there was quite an experience. It was just outstanding in my whole career, of course, to address there all the stakeholders in this project. So reading the book was a kind of a déjà vu for me, in a sense. It brought up feelings that were sort of buried there somewhere, and it was very enjoyable reading for me. But my admiration for this book is in many dimensional, if you like. What my admiration was perhaps mainly on Emma's commitment, the first steps in the actual advocacy, and her description of the complexity involved in pulling this off, if you like. And Emma has already mentioned a few aspects of it, how which is for me, coming from Iceland with a small population and society which is relatively simple, the complexities of the implementation in England and in London in particular is enormous. The 32 boroughs, the different levels of government really that needed to be dealt with, and all these multi-agency structures in the health sector, the social sector, the justice system, and so on. And reading all these, her meetings, for example, with the judiciary, it's really delightful to see how how everyone is really, addressing the complexities of these issues. And Emma is so persistent, yet so gentle in her approach. And it's a really wonderful reading. Now, I could, of course, go on and on about this book, but I won't take much more time from you on this. But I just want to congratulate you again, Emma, and express my gratitude. This is wonderful, this documentation. It will be an inspiring reading for all these pioneers all over Europe and all over the world who are trying to improve the system of response against child sexual abuse everywhere. And this book is a must reader. It's extremely important because in the book you manage to sort of put some heart into everything that you have been doing, but not only heart, but you have really got balls. And that's something which we all aspire to have, even old men like me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bragi, for your wisdom as always. And Thomas, since we are getting so close to the end, I think actually we forgot to run a poll in the very beginning. I don't know if you want to run that intro poll now, but we also have, oh my God, yeah. So we'll do this one now, and then there's another poll coming right after this one, in which we want to know, what has this call inspired you to do next? And I'll remind you that we still have a couple of minutes left. If you want to personally say your congratulations, we can also hang out a little bit after the formal program is over if you want to just chat informally. But for now, I have one last question for you, Emma, and that's, what's next?
Well, I think it's probably not too much of a spoiler to tell you what's in the final chapter, but I guess my vision really is to see this model rolled out across the UK, and it's really exciting that it's going to be starting in Scotland with Children First, that it's already happening in with Tulsa in Ireland. So there's lots of places locally where actually things are moving ahead already. But I would love to see this obviously rolled out across the UK in the same way that in 2005 adult services for sexual abuse were rolled out across, and now everywhere has a sexual assault referral centre. I guess I'd like to keep learning. So from the Promise Network and from other international experts, there's always much more to learn. There's always great ideas and things that we can share. And only this morning, I was just, both our own team, but also some international colleagues I was talking to this morning, both at the same time have said, we should really have a newsletter that's written by children for children. And it's just incredible how it all comes together. Suddenly everyone says, this is the next thing. So already we're looking to the future, seeing about how we can evolve and improve our service. But also, I guess I just love sharing what we've learned and being able to help other people as they're trying to set up services. So I think Shauna shared the link to our annual report from last year. The annual report for our second year should be out soon. We were just looking at the final draft of that today. So that'll be a really exciting bit to be able to share what we've learned in our second year. And I guess a bit like the book, my writing style is to be fairly open and honest. So it's, I think it'll hopefully be helpful to people really to show what we've learned and what we've developed as we've gone along.
Absolutely brilliant, Thomas. I think we can switch to the last poll now. And Emma, super exciting to hear about all of the things that you're working on and your ambition to continue engaging with international actors. And as you know, the Promise Barnahus Network will be here with you every step of the way. And on that note, I'm pleased to announce to everybody on this call that the Lighthouse has been approved as a full member of the network in the most recent round. And they're our very first full member, new member. So congratulations are in order just for that. And I noticed in the chat that there's quite many congratulations coming in to you from there. And Anna O'Reilly says, yes, so we need all children to have access to support from Barnahus if they are a victim of violence. It is their right. Indeed it is. And we'd also love to know if you have any more thoughts in the chat about what you have been inspired to do next. Stephen says, hi, Emma, congratulations with your success and with the Lighthouse and on your book. From your experience of setting up the Lighthouse, do you as a model, do you think the model is transferable to other areas of crime, such as his particular area, the victims of modern slavery, and how did the police view non-police ABE interviews?
Thanks. That's a good question, Stephen. I think the police have been incredibly generous to let us pilot this model with psychologists leading interviews. And I think, although obviously we've not got to the stage of seeing very many of those make it through right through to the court process, I think the feedback both from professionals, both from the police, social workers that have accompanied children, and obviously the children and the families themselves, has been that it's been a really good process, a really positive process. The children have felt really listened to. On the call with us actually is Vicky, who's one of our psychologists, who leads that really specialist kind of interviewing. So I think it's really exciting. There she is. Hello, Vicky. So you know, it's really, really exciting, and I can't claim any credit for that whatsoever. Vicky and her team have learned so much from the Met Police, and have really just come on leaps and bounds. So I think that's something that's really transferable. We'd love to see that tried elsewhere in the country. It's also allowed us to really strengthen our relationship with registered intermediaries, who play a hugely important role in helping that communication process for children at interview. You know, we were really struggling to get intermediaries. There just weren't enough, and so it's been really good to just, you know, strengthen that relationship as well. So I think that model is applicable across other crimes. You know, children that have witnessed murders, children where you know, living in homes with domestic violence, other kinds of physical abuse. I think that's all very transferable. Yeah,
absolutely. We're getting quite a few more comments in the chat now. I'm really proud of you, Emma. I hope your vision for child houses across the country comes to fruition. You're an inspiration. What an amazing dedication to improving the support for children and young people. I'm convinced that you don't sleep. It's maybe my favorite. Such a huge achievement. Very emotional to hear about your journey. You're an inspiration. And I think that is a great moment for us to come to the end of this, of the formal part of this event, and to end it with one last toast. And you'll all now be able to unmute yourself. Thomas will fix that if you want to say cheers out loud. And in this final toast, I'd like to say one more, I'd like to toast the Lighthouse, to all the actors, large and small, who made the journey possible, to those who are continuing to reach for excellence in practice, and to the commitment of Emma and her colleagues to exchange their experiences and learnings. And in all of this, you are enabling system change in the best interest of children, not only locally, but throughout Europe, and inspiring the world. Cheers.
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 Well done, Emma.
Well done, Emma.
Well done, everyone.
Fantastic.
Thank you. And that brings us.
Holly had a question, Shauna, which was
Yeah.
whether the recording of this, so I think it was playing live on YouTube, wasn't it? Will the recording be available afterwards if anyone missed a part of it?
Indeed, we can send out that link. Or in fact, you can just go, you can search for Child Protection Hub on YouTube and you'll find their YouTube page there and you'll find it.
Oh, I can see.
Can I ask a question, please? It's
Yes.
Jan.
Go ahead.
You mentioned registered intermediaries, Emma. Can I just ask, do you use intermediaries? Are they now necessary now that your clinical psychologists are